Some books were considered too dangerous to even exist. This is the story of 25 forbidden manuscripts that vanished from medieval libraries forever. You will discover the exact knowledge that was erased, from revolutionary science to spiritual beliefs that challenged empires, and learn why these works were deemed such a threat. What secrets were so explosive they had to be destroyed completely, and what does their absence tell us about the power of ideas? By the end, you will know the true cost of losing these texts and the hidden history they represented. What do you believe is the most dangerous idea a book could contain? Within the hushed silence of a monastic scriptorium, the only sounds were the soft scratch of a quill and the gentle flicker of candlelight. Here, monks spent their lives in devotion, painstakingly copying sacred texts and classical works, preserving knowledge for future generations. Yet even in this sanctuary of learning, some volumes were deemed too perilous to ever be replicated. Their pages held ideas that could unravel the very fabric of medieval society, a world where the church and the crown held unquestioned authority over what was true and what was permissible. A single forbidden manuscript could challenge this entire structure, making its suppression not just an act of censorship, but a defense of reality itself. These texts ventured into dangerous territories. Alchemy, the pursuit of transforming base metals into gold and discovering the elixir of life, threatened economic and spiritual order. Astrology, which sought to divine fate from the stars, could be interpreted as denying divine providence. Then there were heretical interpretations of scripture that offered alternative paths to salvation, directly challenging the church's monopoly on spiritual truth. Even early scientific theories that proposed a sun-centered universe or detailed human anatomy were seen as profound threats to established doctrine. The danger was not merely that these ideas were different, it was that they were persuasive, offering explanations and powers that lay outside the control of the powerful institutions of the age. A book on alchemy was not just a chemistry text, it was a manual for potentially destabilizing the economy. A heretical gospel was not just an alternate opinion, it was a call for rebellion against the spiritual hierarchy. This is why the response was so severe. A forbidden manuscript was not simply locked away, it was often systematically sought out, its pages scraped clean, burned, or repurposed, its very existence erased from memory. The authority to decide a book's fate rested with those who held power, from ecclesiastical councils to royal courts, all united in the goal of maintaining control. So what made a manuscript forbidden? It was any knowledge that empowered the individual at the expense of the institution, that offered secrets the authorities could not contain, or that presented a truth too dangerous to be heard. Deep in the foothills of the Pyrenees, under the cover of night, a small group of believers gathered to study a book that could get them killed. They were the Cathar perfecti, and their most sacred text presented a vision of reality so radical it threatened to tear Christendom apart. This lost gospel taught a stark dualism. It claimed the physical world around us, everything we can touch and see, was not the creation of a benevolent God, but of a malicious demiurge, a lesser and evil deity. In this view, the material universe was a prison for the divine spark of the human soul. Salvation, therefore, could not be found through the sacraments of the Church, but only through a life of extreme asceticism, rejecting all earthly desires and attachments to free the spirit from its fleshy cage. Can you comprehend how terrifying this idea was to the medieval Church? It did not just propose a different ritual or a new saint. It declared the entire physical creation, the very world God had called good, to be a corrupt and evil mistake. This struck at the root of Catholic authority, which derived its power from administering sacraments like baptism and communion, sacred acts that involved physical matter like water, bread, and wine. If matter was inherently evil, then the Church itself was part of the prison. The existence of this manuscript was a direct call for spiritual revolution, and the response was swift and merciless. It helped ignite the Albigensian Crusade, a 20-year war of extermination sanctioned by the Pope to wipe the Cathar heresy from the map, and with the Perfecti and their followers, their sacred text was also hunted down. Every copy was sought out and committed to the flames, its pages turned to ash to ensure its dangerous ideas could never take root again. Today, we know of this gospel only through the angry accusations recorded by the inquisitors who destroyed it. We are left to piece together its profound spiritual alternatives from the very words of its persecutors, a whisper of a faith that dared to see the world differently. The loss of this single manuscript represents more than just a missing book. It is the silencing of an entire spiritual path that saw the struggle between light and darkness as the fundamental truth of our existence. The scent of sulfur and heated glass filled a chamber where a lone scholar stared into a bubbling flask, guided by a manuscript that promised the impossible. This was not merely a recipe for gold, it was a map to the philosopher's stone, a substance said to grant eternal life and limitless wealth. Texts attributed to mythical sages like Hermes Trismegistus or the famously elusive Nicholas Flamel did not just list ingredients, they wove complex allegories. The process of transforming lead into gold was described as a parallel to the purification of the human soul, a journey from base desire to spiritual perfection. This made the manuscript doubly dangerous. It offered a path to power that bypassed both the king's mint and the church's sacraments. Imagine the threat to a feudal economy if a single individual could manufacture vast wealth in a hidden laboratory. More profoundly, the idea that a person could achieve a godlike state through experimentation and secret knowledge challenged the very hierarchy of creation, where divinity was a gift from God, not a prize to be won through human ingenuity. Authorities had every reason to fear its disruptive potential. While fragments and second-hand accounts of these alchemical secrets survive in other books, the definitive manual, the one said to contain the precise diagrams and final instructions for the great work, has never been found. It was likely sought out and systematically destroyed, its pages burned to protect the established order from alchemy's revolutionary promise. How close did these dedicated seekers actually come to their goal? Their relentless experiments, documented in coded language, laid the groundwork for the science of chemistry. They discovered new elements and perfected laboratory equipment in their obsessive quest. The true loss of this master text is not a missing formula for gold, but the silencing of a complete philosophical system, one that dared to merge spiritual aspiration with physical experiment. What might our understanding of both matter and spirit look like today if that key manuscript had survived intact? The bubbling alchemist's flask gives way to the quiet precision of an astronomer's observatory, a place where the universe itself was being measured and mapped with stunning accuracy. In the great library of Cordoba, a jewel of Al-Andalus, one codex stood apart for its revolutionary vision. Its pages were filled with intricate charts plotting the paths of planets with a precision that Europe would not see again for hundreds of years. These were not simple star maps, they were complex mathematical tables and diagrams born from a fusion of Greek geometry, Persian observational data, and Indian trigonometric calculations. This single manuscript presented a cosmos that was orderly, predictable, and profoundly at odds with the earth-centered universe that the Church taught was divine truth. Its calculations subtly hinted at a reality where the earth was not the fixed center of all creation. Such a suggestion was not merely an academic disagreement. It was a direct challenge to a fundamental pillar of medieval belief, a pillar that placed humanity and its spiritual drama at the very heart of God's creation. The knowledge within that codex was a ticking clock, waiting to redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. Then came the Reconquista. As Christian armies pushed south across the Iberian Peninsula, the great libraries of Al-Andalus, those beacons of multicultural learning, were often dismantled or destroyed. In the fervor of religious conquest, these advanced astronomical works were dismissed as pagan knowledge or heretical sorcery. Many were burned, their vellum pages repurposed for simpler texts, or simply left to rot in forgotten cellars. The loss was catastrophic. The precise planetary data and the sophisticated mathematical models contained in those vanished pages had to be painstakingly rediscovered centuries later. This single act of cultural destruction effectively reset the clock on European astronomy, delaying the work of thinkers like Copernicus and Galileo by generations. How many questions could have been answered, how many debates settled, if those Moorish charts had survived to guide them? The disappearance of this manuscript is a stark reminder that when cultures clash, it is not just territory that is lost, but truth itself, setting back the shared journey of human understanding for hundreds of years. A sealed iron chest hidden deep within a Templar preceptory held a truth far more explosive than any treasure. The Knights Templar were more than just pious warriors. They were bankers, diplomats, and one of the most powerful international organizations the world had ever seen. A single manuscript, their forbidden history, was rumored to document everything the Order dared not make public. It would have chronicled their true origins, not as simple protectors of pilgrims, but as an order with potential ties to older mystical traditions and esoteric knowledge discovered beneath the ruins of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. What did they actually find during their excavations? The manuscript might have revealed artifacts or teachings that presented an alternative spiritual history, one that directly contradicted the official narratives of the Church. This knowledge, combined with their staggering wealth and a network that stretched across Europe and the Middle East, made them untouchable for nearly 200 years. But no institution becomes that powerful without making powerful enemies. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, saw an opportunity. In a single, coordinated dawn raid on Friday, October 13, 1307, he had every Templar in France arrested on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and secret rituals. The true purpose of the persecution was to seize their immense wealth and dismantle their financial empire. To ensure the order could never rise again, every piece of evidence that could challenge the charges had to vanish. Their commanderies were ransacked, their libraries burned, and any manuscript detailing their inner workings, their true history, or their spiritual practices was systematically sought out and destroyed. The official records of their trials remain, but they are filled with confessions extracted under torture, telling the story their persecutors wanted told. The Templars' own version of events, their forbidden history, is the one that is missing. This is why the legend of that lost manuscript endures. Its absence fuels endless speculation. Did it contain proof of their innocence, or did it hold secrets so heretical that their destruction was inevitable? We are left with only the accusations and a void where their own truth should be, a permanent mystery surrounding one of history's most dramatic falls from grace. A single candle illuminated a forbidden book, its pages filled with the precise contours of the human heart. In the shadows of a medieval university, a physician risked everything to study this manuscript, a work of anatomy based not on ancient guesswork, but on the direct evidence of the dissected human form. This was a profound act of rebellion. For centuries, the Church had largely forbidden the dissection of human corpses, viewing the body as a sacred vessel for the soul, not a subject for empirical study. Medical knowledge was instead dominated by the thousand-year-old theories of Galen, a Roman physician whose anatomical descriptions, based mainly on animal dissections, were riddled with errors that went unchallenged. This lost treatise changed everything. It likely contained meticulous drawings of the circulatory system, the complex structure of the brain, and the true arrangement of muscles, all observed firsthand. Its existence directly threatened the established order of knowledge. If a physician could learn the body's secrets by looking inside it, what did that say about the authority of ancient texts and the Church's control over the definition of life and death? The suppression of this manuscript was a deliberate act to maintain control over the human body itself. Without it, medicine remained chained to superstition and flawed dogma. Physicians continued to believe, as Galen taught, that the liver produced blood, or that illness was solely an imbalance of four bodily humors. Surgeries were performed with a fundamental misunderstanding of internal anatomy, leading to untold suffering and death. The loss of this single text set back the entire field of medicine for generations. Imagine the lives that might have been saved if surgeons had known the exact location of an appendix or the true function of the kidneys centuries earlier. How many pioneering minds were lost because they lacked the one book that could have shown them the path to true medical science? This vanished manuscript represents more than missing diagrams. It is the ghost of a future that was stolen, a future where healing could have been built on evidence instead of enforced ignorance. A cold dread seeped through the monastery walls, a palpable fear that matched the pall of death hanging over the countryside. In this atmosphere of utter despair, a lone monk unrolled a forbidden codex, its pages filled with terrifyingly accurate prophecies of the very plague now ravaging the land. This was no ordinary book of scripture. It was a prophetic text attributed to a visionary like the Sibyl or a martyred saint that mapped out a detailed timeline of apocalypse. Its verses spoke of coming wars, celestial signs, and divine judgments, but its most dangerous passages were not the predictions of famine and pestilence. They were the scathing condemnations of a corrupt church and a decadent nobility. The manuscript argued that these earthly calamities were not random acts of God, but direct punishments for the moral failure of those in power. In the hands of a terrified and desperate population, such an idea was a spark waiting to hit tinder. It offered a radical explanation for their suffering, one that placed the blame squarely on the ruling class, not on their own sinfulness. This was a vision of the end times that empowered the common people with a dangerous truth that their leaders had failed them and God was now settling the score. Can you understand the sheer threat of such a document? While kings and bishops struggled to maintain order, this codex provided a divine justification for rebellion, for rejecting authority entirely in the face of an imminent and purifying judgment. It inspired not just fear, but a fervent, revolutionary hope that a new, perfect world was coming to sweep the old one away. The authorities moved swiftly to extinguish this flame. The manuscript was declared a work of heresy and sorcery, its predictions dismissed as demonic fabrications designed to lead the faithful astray. Every copy was hunted down and burned, not because its prophecies were necessarily false, but because the interpretation it encouraged was far too dangerous to the social order. Today, we only know of its contents through brief, horrified references in official chronicles and in the distorted echoes of its imagery found in church art, where artists secretly embedded symbols of the prophesied doom. What specific warnings did it hold for the crises that would follow the plague? We can only guess. The true loss of this prophetic codex is the loss of a medieval voice that dared to connect earthly suffering directly to the failures of the powerful. Its destruction ensured that the narrative of the apocalypse remained firmly under institutional control, a managed fear that would not challenge the hierarchy it was meant to uphold. A single page of scripture, written not in the sacred Latin of the priests but in the rough, vibrant English of the common people, could get you burned at the stake. For a layperson in 14th century England, holding a manuscript like this was an act of profound defiance. This was the Heretical Bible translation, a work that tore down the wall of language separating the flock from their shepherds. Before its existence, the Word of God was mediated entirely by the clergy. Only they could read Latin, only they could interpret the scriptures, and only they could dispense salvation through the Church's complex system of sacraments. This monopoly on divine truth was the very source of their power. A vernacular Bible, often linked to the reformer John Wycliffe and his followers, the Lollards, shattered this control. It allowed a farmer, a blacksmith, or a merchant to read the Gospels for themselves, to question why their local priest lived in luxury while Christ spoke of poverty, or to wonder if the elaborate rituals of the Mass were truly found in the simple teachings of Jesus. This was not just about reading, it was about thinking. It empowered individuals to form a personal relationship with God, a relationship that did not require a clerical intermediary. Can you see why the Church considered this the most dangerous heresy of all? It challenged the entire spiritual economy. If every person could access God directly through their own reading and understanding, then what was the purpose of the vast, wealthy, and powerful institution that stood between them? The response was brutal and absolute. Church authorities declared these manuscripts heretical and launched a relentless campaign to find and destroy every copy. They were publicly burned in town squares, their ashes a warning to any who would seek spiritual independence. The men and women who owned them, the Lollards, were persecuted, imprisoned, and executed for the crime of possessing the Word of God in their own tongue. This systematic suppression was tragically effective, leading to the near-total loss of these early English Bibles. Their destruction deliberately delayed the widespread availability of translated scripture for over a century, until the forces of the Reformation finally broke the Church's monopoly. What might have happened if these manuscripts had survived and spread? The entire landscape of religious and social history might have shifted generations earlier, empowering common people with sacred knowledge and accelerating the move toward religious reform. The loss of this text is a testament to the fear that true understanding can inspire in those who rely on ignorance to maintain their authority. The crackling fire of the mead hall cast long shadows as a poet's voice rose above the din, weaving a tapestry of words that held an entire world within it. This was the lost epic of a pagan kingdom, a single, magnificent manuscript that served as the library, the scripture, and the soul of a people. Within its illuminated pages were not just stories, but a complete cosmology. It explained the creation of the world from the body of a primordial giant, the intricate relationships between gods of thunder and fertility, and the heroic codes that bound warriors to their chieftains. These were histories, ethical guides, and sacred myths all in one, a vibrant cultural identity preserved in ink and vellum. This epic was a direct rival to the Christian world, slowly being imposed across the continent. Its gods were many, its morality was tied to honor and fate, not sin and redemption, and its heroes answered to their people, not to a distant, singular deity. As kings converted to Christianity, often for political alliance or military advantage, these foundational texts became intolerable. They were living proof of the old ways, a spiritual anchor that had to be cut loose. The most common fate for such a manuscript was not a grand bonfire, but a quiet, systematic erasure. Monks, tasked with preserving knowledge, would often take these pagan codices and painstakingly scrape the ink from their pages. The valuable vellum was then reused to copy psalms, gospels, or saints' lives. These recycled books are known as palimpsests, and beneath the clear Christian text, the ghost of the original epic often remains, a faint, unreadable scar on the parchment. Modern technology can sometimes tease out these lost words with ultraviolet light, but for the most part, the original epic is gone forever. So what exactly was lost? We know Beowulf survived by a thread, a single manuscript that gives us a glimpse into one tradition. But this other epic from a different kingdom with its own unique pantheon is a complete void. What was its central tragedy? Who was its great hero? And what impossible quest did they undertake? What wisdom about navigating a harsh world, what understanding of the human condition was encoded in its verses? The loss is one of profound cultural amnesia. We are left with a medieval map of Europe that is mostly monochrome, when in reality it was a brilliant tapestry of diverse beliefs and stories. This single vanished manuscript represents the silencing of an entire worldview, a unique answer to life's great questions that we can no longer hear. Its absence narrows our understanding of the past, reminding us that history is written not only by the victors, but on the erased pages of the vanquished. The faint glow of a single candle was not enough to illuminate the entire coded page. Its surface a labyrinth of geometric shapes, astrological symbols, and letters rearranged in a seemingly nonsensical order. This was the cryptographic cipher of a secret society, a manuscript that functioned as both a spiritual guide and a shield. For initiates of a group like the Rosicrucians, this book was the key to their entire world. Its complex codes were not a game, they were a necessary defense. The text concealed philosophical tenets that dared to merge mystical experience with emerging scientific thought, proposing that the laws of nature were themselves a form of divine language. It outlined initiation rituals designed to transform the individual's consciousness, and it may have even held quiet political ambitions for a reformation of society based on these enlightened principles. To an outsider, the pages were impenetrable nonsense. To a member, they were a map to a higher reality. This made the manuscript a primary target for both church and state. A group that operated in shadows, bound by secret knowledge and loyal only to itself, was a profound threat to any centralized authority. What if their political goal was the end of monarchy? What if their spiritual teaching denied the need for priests? The very existence of such a coded text implied a conspiracy, and the only way to dismantle that conspiracy was to destroy its heart. Authorities hunted for this master cipher, and when they found copies, they were burned without being fully deciphered. The original, comprehensive manuscript vanished, leaving behind only fragments, rumors, and later imitations that pale in comparison to the supposed original. What was the true nature of the initiation it described? Did it contain lost alchemical processes or advanced mathematical concepts disguised as allegory? The enduring allure of this lost cipher is not just about the secrets it kept, but about the powerful human impulse it represents, the deep need to find others who share a hidden understanding of the world and to protect that bond with a language only they can speak. Locked in a Venetian sea chest, a chart of vellum promised a fortune and a death sentence in equal measure. This was no ordinary map, but a forbidden portolan chart, its lines tracing coastlines that did not officially exist. Drawn from the whispered accounts of sailors who had ventured far beyond sanctioned routes, its pages held the contours of islands in the Western Ocean or the sprawling shape of a southern continent, knowledge that was decades ahead of its time. These secret cartographies were the most valuable commodities in the world because they challenged the very foundation of geographical power. The medieval world understood the earth through the lens of ancient authorities like Ptolemy, whose maps, though often inaccurate, were considered gospel. A chart like this, based on empirical observation rather than inherited dogma, rendered those ancient texts obsolete, but the true danger was not academic. It was economic. Powerful maritime states like Portugal and Spain operated under papal treaties that divided the unexplored world between them, granting exclusive trade rights to the riches of the East and West. A Venetian chart showing a new, faster route to the Spice Islands or a hidden source of African gold would shatter these monopolies overnight. It could ignite wars, bankrupt kingdoms, and shift the balance of global power into the hands of a rival merchant family. This is why such a manuscript had to be suppressed. The map itself was hunted, its existence denied, and the sailors or cartographers who created it were often silenced, their voyages erased from the official record. We are left to wonder, what lands did these charts actually depict? Did a Portuguese caravel secretly reach the coast of Brazil decades before Cabral? Did Basque whalers already know the fishing grounds of Newfoundland? The loss of this cartography forced later explorers like Columbus to sail into a documented void, rediscovering lands that others may have already found. How different would our understanding of the age of exploration be if this map had survived? The course of empires, the flow of wealth, even the cultural exchange between continents might have unfolded on an entirely different timeline. This single vanished manuscript underscores a brutal truth that in the race for global dominance, the first casualty is often the truth itself and the maps that dared to record it. A single candle illuminated a forbidden book, its pages filled with the precise contours of the human heart. In the shadows of a medieval university, a physician risked everything to study this manuscript, a work of anatomy based not on ancient guesswork, but on the direct evidence of the dissected human form. This was a profound act of rebellion. For centuries, the Church had largely forbidden the dissection of human corpses, viewing the body as a sacred vessel for the soul, not a subject for empirical study. Medical knowledge was instead dominated by the thousand-year-old theories of Galen, a Roman physician whose anatomical descriptions, based mainly on animal dissections, were riddled with errors that went unchallenged. This lost treatise changed everything. It likely contained meticulous drawings of the circulatory system, the complex structure of the brain, and the true arrangement of muscles, all observed firsthand. Its existence directly threatened the established order of knowledge. If a physician could learn the body's secrets by looking inside it, what did that say about the authority of ancient texts and the Church's control over the definition of life and death? The suppression of this manuscript was a deliberate act to maintain control over the human body itself. Without it, medicine remained chained to superstition and flawed dogma. Physicians continued to believe, as Galen taught, that the liver produced blood, or that illness was solely an imbalance of four bodily humors. Surgeries were performed with a fundamental misunderstanding of internal anatomy, leading to untold suffering and death. The loss of this single text set back the entire field of medicine for generations. Imagine the lives that might have been saved if surgeons had known the exact location of an appendix or the true function of the kidneys centuries earlier. How many pioneering minds were lost because they lacked the one book that could have shown them the path to true medical science? This vanished manuscript represents more than missing diagrams. It is the ghost of a future that was stolen, a future where healing could have been built on evidence instead of enforced ignorance. The heated university disputation in Paris fell into a stunned silence. A master of arts had just cited a forbidden commentary, a work that twisted the philosophy of Aristotle into a weapon against the very foundations of Christian faith. This manuscript, likely penned by a radical follower of the Islamic philosopher Averroes, did not merely interpret the ancient Greek, it unleashed him. Its pages argued for a world that was eternal, having no beginning in a divine creation and no prophesied end. It questioned the immortality of the individual soul, suggesting instead a single, universal intellect that all humans shared in temporarily. Most dangerously, it championed a principle called double truth, the idea that something could be true in philosophy and reason, while its opposite could be true in theology and faith. This created a wall of separation between the pursuit of knowledge and the demands of belief, granting reason its own sovereign territory. Can you grasp the seismic shift this proposed? It meant a scholar could investigate the natural world using logic and observation alone, without every conclusion having to bend to conform to Scripture. The universe could be studied on its own terms, not just as a symbol of God's plan. The authorities saw this for the threat it was. In 1277, the Bishop of Paris issued a formal condemnation of 219 such philosophical propositions, specifically targeting these Aristotelian commentaries. The response was not a debate, it was an eradication. The manuscripts were sought out and burned, their ashes a message to every scholar in Europe. The innovative ideas within that text, its potential advancements in logic and metaphysics, were lost just as they were being born. What new paths in science or ethics might have opened if reason had been granted that early independence? The destruction of this single commentary did more than silence one radical voice. It erected a wall around the medieval mind, clearly marking the boundary beyond which intellectual curiosity was forbidden to tread. A whisper of incense hung in the air of a hidden chamber, where a circle of men and women passed a single, worn manuscript from hand to hand. These were the brethren of the free spirit, and the book they cherished contained rituals that promised a union with the divine so complete it rendered the church obsolete. Its pages taught a doctrine called antinomianism, the belief that once a person had achieved this direct spiritual ecstasy, they were so perfectly united with God that they were beyond sin. The moral laws of the Church, the very concepts of heaven and hell, no longer applied to them. They saw themselves as living saints already in a state of perfection on earth. This was not just a different form of prayer, it was a theological atom bomb. It proposed that every individual could achieve the highest spiritual state without priests, without confession, and without the sacraments that were the lifeblood of the medieval church. Their rituals, detailed in that lost manuscript, were likely designed to induce these ecstatic states through chant, dance, and meditation, creating a direct personal pathway to God that bypassed every level of the religious hierarchy. Can you comprehend the threat this posed? It was a vision of total spiritual autonomy. If every peasant, every artisan could become a living God through their own efforts, what need was there for bishops, for popes, for the entire sprawling institution of the Church? The manuscript also spoke of radical social equality, arguing that in God's eyes there was no distinction between noble and serf, man and woman. In a society built on rigid feudal and gender hierarchies, this idea was as dangerous as the spiritual one. The response from the authorities was predictably brutal. Inquisitors were dispatched with a single mission: to find every copy of this text and every person who had ever touched it. The manuscripts were burned in public squares as warnings, and the brethren themselves were tracked down, tried for heresy, and executed. The suppression was so effective that we know of their beliefs almost entirely from the court records of their persecutors, who described their practices with horror and disgust. What specific techniques for achieving ecstasy were lost with that book? What unique understanding of the divine, born from direct experience rather than theological debate, was erased forever? The loss of this manuscript leaves a gaping hole in our understanding of medieval mysticism, silencing a tradition that valued raw, personal revelation over structured dogma. Its eradication was a stark lesson that the most dangerous idea is not a complex theological argument, but the simple, empowering belief that God can be found within without anyone's permission. Her hands, stained with the juices of crushed herbs, turned the pages of a book that held the health of her entire village. This was a forbidden treatise on women's health, a manuscript compiled and guarded by female healers and midwives across countless generations. Its pages were a living library of practical wisdom, detailing which root could ease a mother's labor pains, which poultice could fight infection in a wound, and which tea could restore balance to a body racked with fever. This knowledge represented a profound form of autonomy, a healthcare system that operated entirely outside the male-dominated institutions of the university and the church. For the common people, especially women, this healer was the doctor, the pharmacist, and the counselor all in one. Her manuscript was not just a collection of recipes, it was the codification of centuries of observation, experimentation, and successful care. It understood the female body in a way that male physicians, who are often forbidden from even examining female patients, simply could not. So what exactly was lost when this treatise was destroyed? We can guess it contained advanced understandings of herbal antibiotics, using molds similar to what we now call penicillin. It certainly held intricate knowledge of the reproductive cycle and effective plant-based contraceptives that gave women control over their own bodies and futures. Its midwifery techniques, refined through countless successful births, were likely far more effective and compassionate than the often brutal interventions of male barber surgeons. But this very success made it a target. As the witch hunts intensified across Europe, this manuscript became damning evidence. A woman who could cure an illness where a priest's prayers had failed was suspect. A woman who understood the secrets of birth and death was seen as dabbling in dark powers. The male medical establishment, seeking to consolidate its authority, systematically dismissed this folk knowledge as mere superstition or, even worse, denounced it as diabolical witchcraft. The manuscript was not just burned as incorrect, it was burned as evil. With its destruction, the healers themselves were silenced, persecuted, and executed, their knowledge dying with them. The catastrophic impact of this loss echoes through history. It deliberately severed the chain of female medical expertise, creating a vacuum that was filled by often ignorant male practitioners. Countless effective, natural remedies were forgotten, and for centuries, women's health was misunderstood and dangerously mismanaged by a profession that had willfully erased the very experts who understood it best. How many generations of women suffered needlessly because the one book that could have helped them was ashes? The vanished treatise on women's health represents more than lost data. It is the ghost of an entire parallel path for medicine, one rooted in community, empathy, and a deep, practical wisdom that was systematically erased to cement a new order of control. Far from the bustling universities, a lone monk in a windswept monastery kept a vigil of ink and parchment. His manuscript was not a work of theology, but a log of the night sky, filled with observations that defied the celestial order. Night after night, he charted the paths of wandering stars that moved in ways Ptolemy never described. He recorded the sudden, terrifying appearance of a guest star, a point of light blazing where none had been before, a supernova outshining every other object in the heavens. His most troubling entries detailed the hazy glow of comets, tracing their paths not through the sublunar sphere of change and decay, but deep within the supposedly perfect and immutable realm of the planets. These were not mere curiosities, they were cracks in the foundation of reality itself, According to the accepted Aristotelian model, the heavens beyond the moon were a domain of quintessence, an eternal and unchanging substance. The moon, the sun, the planets, and the fixed stars were perfect, crystalline spheres in eternal, circular motion. A new star or a comet in that realm was an ontological impossibility, a flaw in the divine machinery. The monk's careful notes proved otherwise. His data suggested a cosmos that was dynamic, unpredictable, and alive with change, a direct challenge to the philosophical bedrock of both science and faith. The authorities who eventually discovered this work would have seen it not as pioneering science, but as a dangerous form of heresy. A universe in flux was a universe not fully under divine control, or at least not controlled in the way the Church taught. The manuscript presented a sky that did not conform to the clean, hierarchical model used to justify a clean, hierarchical society on Earth. Its suppression was a quiet, administrative act, a decision to file away or burn a set of inconvenient facts that threatened to complicate a simpler, more manageable truth. So what cosmic events did his lost pages hold? His records of that supernova could have provided modern astronomers with critical data on stellar evolution. His precise comet trajectories might have helped calculate the solar system's scale centuries earlier. How much sooner would we have understood the true nature of these celestial visitors if his solitary work had survived? The tragedy of this lost logbook is a testament to a brutal irony, that the most accurate observations were often the most threatening, and that the key to understanding the cosmos was sometimes silenced by the very institutions sworn to seek truth. That courtier's hands trembled not from fear of the king's guards outside the door, but from the explosive ideas on the page before him. This banned political treatise on tyranny was a direct assault on the cornerstone of medieval power, the divine right of kings. Its arguments, woven from threads of classical philosophy and radical biblical interpretation, declared that a ruler's authority was not a sacred gift from God, but a conditional contract with the governed. The manuscript asserted that when a monarch becomes a tyrant, violating natural law and the common good, the people not only had a right to resist, they had a moral duty to depose him. This was not just criticism, it was a theological and philosophical justification for revolution. Can you comprehend the sedition in those words, in a world where the king's will was considered law and his coronation a holy sacrament? The treatise systematically dismantled the logic of feudalism, where loyalty to one's lord was the ultimate virtue. It suggested that the obligations between subject and sovereign were mutual, and that when the sovereign failed in his duty to provide justice and protection, those bonds were broken. This idea was so dangerous that monarchs across Europe treated its very existence as a threat to their thrones. Authors were hunted, their identities erased. Every copy of the manuscript was sought out with the same urgency as a plot against the crown, and once found, they were burned in public spectacles designed to terrorize any who might be swayed by its logic. The loss of this specific treatise and others like it created a profound gap in the history of political thought. We know that figures like John Locke, centuries later, would build similar arguments that fueled the Glorious Revolution in England and inspired the American founders. But what if these ideas had been allowed to circulate and evolve 200 years earlier? What earlier democratic movements, what proto-parliaments or peasant revolts, might have found in this text a coherent philosophical foundation for their struggles? Its destruction deliberately delayed the development of constitutional government, keeping the concept of popular sovereignty a dangerous, whispered secret instead of a legitimate political theory. The absence of this manuscript represents more than a missing book. It is the ghost of a liberty that was suppressed, a road not taken toward accountable power that might have spared countless generations from the absolute rule of a single, unquestioned crown. A scholar could walk through a vast cathedral of the mind, each pillar and stained glass window a perfect placeholder for a complex philosophical argument or a lengthy passage of scripture. This was the forbidden art of memory, a sophisticated mental architecture detailed in a single, suppressed manuscript. Its techniques were not simple repetition, but a system of creating elaborate imaginary palaces within one's own thoughts. You would visualize a familiar place like a grand castle or a bustling town square, and then populate it with striking, often bizarre, images that symbolized the information you needed to remember. A dancing bear with a crown might represent a specific king's edict, while a bleeding book on a baker's table could encode a theological concept. This was a powerful tool for organizing vast amounts of knowledge in an era before printing, enabling scholars to hold entire libraries in their heads. The very power of this system made it dangerous. Such control over memory was not just a study aid, it was a form of intellectual and spiritual self-mastery. Some practitioners began using these techniques not just to recall accepted knowledge, but to explore and organize new, heretical ideas, constructing mental frameworks for philosophies that challenged the church. When these memory arts became intertwined with esoteric traditions and the search for hidden wisdom, authorities saw a clear threat. A mind trained by this manuscript was a mind that could not be easily controlled, one that could independently build and retain complex systems of thought outside sanctioned doctrine. The book was condemned, its methods labeled as a form of occult magic that could lead the user into pride and error, and it was systematically purged from libraries. Its disappearance meant the loss of a revolutionary cognitive toolkit. How much faster could scientific and philosophical knowledge have advanced if scholars had possessed these powerful techniques for mental organization? The rediscovery of similar memory arts during the Renaissance hints at the potential that was lost. The suppression of this text was not just the burning of paper, it was an attempt to limit the very architecture of human thought, ensuring that the mind itself remained within walls that others had built. Hidden in the apothecary's garden among the healing herbs were specimens of a far more lethal nature, their properties detailed in a single, infamous Herbal. This manuscript did not shy away from the dark side of nature's pharmacy. It catalogued plants like monk should, with its beautiful blue flowers that could stop a human heart, and hemlock, the very poison that claimed the life of Socrates. Yet its pages were not merely a guide to death. For every toxin it described, it also listed potential antidotes and, most intriguingly, explored how tiny, controlled doses of these same poisons could be used to treat disease, to numb pain, or to calm a racing heart. This was knowledge with a double edge, sharp enough to save a life or end one with terrifying subtlety. In an age of treacherous court politics where a rival could be eliminated by a tainted cup of wine, the existence of such a book was a direct threat to the powerful. A monarch could not feel safe if the formula for an undetectable poison was circulating among his courtiers. The manuscript's destruction was therefore a political necessity, an attempt to control a silent, invisible weapon. But the act of burning this herbal to prevent murder also incinerated an advanced understanding of toxicology. The lost antidotes and the pioneering research into the medicinal use of potent substances set back the entire field of pharmacology for centuries. How many lives could have been saved by the antidote for belladonna poisoning that was lost with those pages? How much earlier might we have developed treatments derived from venom and toxins if that foundational research had survived? The case of this lost herbal forces us to confront a difficult truth about knowledge itself. It is never purely good or evil, but a tool whose impact rests entirely in the hands of the user. By destroying the manuscript to prevent its worst application, the authorities also guaranteed we would never benefit from its best. A sealed diplomatic pouch, its lock picked and contents scattered, revealed nothing but pages of bewildering code. These were not simple substitutions, but the lifeblood of medieval statecraft, encrypted correspondence between kings and their ambassadors. Within these coded letters lay the true architecture of power, secret alliances forged against a common enemy, promises of gold to betray a trusted vassal, or the precise date for a surprise invasion that would redraw the map of Europe. A single deciphered message could collapse a kingdom, making the cipher itself a weapon more powerful than any army. Rival states employed entire teams of codebreakers, the medieval equivalent of intelligence agencies, dedicated to intercepting and cracking these diplomatic pouches. Success meant gaining a devastating advantage. Failure, or the fear of a compromised code, meant that the existing cryptographic system had to be entirely abandoned. The most sensitive records of these shadowy negotiations, the master cipher keys and the most explosive decoded summaries, were not archived for historians. They were the first things to be burned in a crisis or systematically destroyed by a conquering power to hide the evidence of their own treachery or their enemies' cunning. What epoch-changing agreements were lost with them? We know of treaties signed publicly, but what of the secret clauses agreed upon in those coded letters, the private understandings that truly govern the actions of states? The absence of this clandestine correspondence leaves us with only the official, sanitized version of medieval history, the grand speeches and public proclamations, while the backroom deals and the raw, pragmatic calculus of power remain a mystery. This gap in the record forces us to wonder how many wars were started by a lie we can no longer uncover, or how many periods of peace were purchased with a secret promise now lost to the flames. The vanished diplomatic codex does not just represent missing information, it represents the loss of the hidden script upon which the public drama of history was performed. A single lute string plucked in a sun-drenched courtyard could carry a more dangerous message than a drawn sword. The forbidden music of the troubadours was not merely entertainment, it was a sophisticated vehicle for dissent, its lyrics and melodies encoded with biting satire and radical social critique. These poet-musicians, often from the rising merchant or knightly classes, traveled from court to court, their songs performed from memory or from delicate, hand-copied manuscripts. Their verses might seem, on the surface, to be about the pains of unrequited love for a noble lady, but beneath this courtly veneer lay a potent challenge to the established order. A song praising a lover's virtue could subtly mock the hypocrisy of a local bishop. A lament about a cruel lord could be a thinly veiled indictment of the entire feudal system, giving voice to the frustrations of the serf and the artisan who had no other platform. The true genius of this art was its fusion of word and sound. The melodies themselves, with their unconventional rhythms and mournful tones, could convey a sense of yearning for a different world, an emotional undercurrent that reinforced the subversive lyrics. This was art as a tool of resistance, amplifying the whispers of the marginalized into a haunting, memorable song that could spread from town to town with viral speed. The authorities understood this power perfectly. A written law could be posted on a church door and ignored by an illiterate populace, but a catchy tune with a critical lyric could be hummed by a farmer in his fields and sung by a weaver at her loom, planting seeds of doubt and discontent far from the ears of power. This is why these musical texts were systematically suppressed. Manuscripts containing the most satirical or heretical songs were hunted down and burned. The troubadours themselves were often exiled, silenced, or forced to recant. The loss was a double tragedy. we lost not only the specific social commentaries, the raw, unfiltered voice of medieval popular opinion, but also profound artistic innovations. These musicians were pioneers of complex poetic forms and musical harmonies that would not be seen again for generations. What new musical scales, what revolutionary song structures died when those pages were turned to ash? The silencing of the troubadour manuscripts is a stark reminder that a love song can be a revolutionary act, and that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not a sword, but a perfectly crafted melody. The quill did not merely sketch a griffin's majestic form, it dissected it, hypothesizing the precise musculature needed to power its wings, and the unique skeletal structure required to support its lion's body and eagle's head. These anatomical studies of animal-human hybrids were far more than flights of fancy. They were serious, if speculative, attempts to impose logic upon the entire natural world, even its most fantastical corners. A bestiary containing such drawings was not just a storybook, it was a philosophical argument. It proposed that if God's creation included creatures like the half-human, half-horse centaur, then they too must follow divine laws of anatomy and function. The scholar who meticulously illustrated the internal organs of a mermaid was engaging in a profound exercise, using the tools of reason to explore the very limits of nature's possibilities. This blending of observed biology with myth was a cornerstone of the pre-scientific worldview, a universe still rich with wonder and symbolic meaning. Yet this vibrant intellectual landscape was precisely what religious reformers sought to flatten. During periods of intense piety, these hybrid manuscripts were condemned as dangerous superstition, or even worse, as a form of idolatry that distracted from the worship of the one true God. The intricate illustration of a dragon's circulatory system was not seen as a logical exercise, but as a blasphemous giving of life to a demonic symbol. The great irony is that in their zeal to purge the world of false creatures, the reformers destroyed a true understanding of the medieval mind. We lost a clear window into how our ancestors reconciled faith with reason, and how they used imagination as a legitimate tool for philosophical inquiry. What principles of biology did they believe could be stretched to accommodate a creature with two different natures? How did they envision the soul of a being that was part animal and part human? The loss of these hybrid studies did more than erase pretty pictures. It erased a complete taxonomy of thought, a map of a world where the boundaries between the possible and the impossible were still thrillingly undefined. The merchant guild's secret ledgers told one story, but a single hidden manuscript told a far more dangerous one. This banned economic treatise on trade and usury dared to challenge the Church's absolute prohibition on lending money at interest, a practice condemned as the sin of usury. Its pages argued that for commerce to flourish and new industries to be born, capital needed to be mobile. It proposed that a fee for the use of money was not inherently sinful, but a practical necessity for funding long trade voyages, building new ships, and creating workshops that employed entire towns. This was not just a set of financial tips, it was a radical new framework that separated profit from sin and suggested that wealth creation could be a moral good in itself. Can you understand the threat this posed to the established order? The medieval economy was deeply intertwined with spiritual life. The Church's ban on usury was meant to prevent the exploitation of the poor and to uphold the idea that money was sterile. It could not legitimately breed more money. This treatise, blending sharp practical advice with theoretical innovation, threatened to unravel that entire moral fabric. It empowered the rising merchant class with a philosophical justification for their activities, suggesting that their success could be a sign of God's favor rather than a step toward damnation. The response from ecclesiastical authorities was swift and severe. the manuscript was declared heretical, its arguments dismissed as a greed-driven corruption of Christian charity. Every copy was hunted down and burned, not merely for its financial advice, but for the new world it envisioned, a world where economic power could grow independently of the Church's spiritual oversight. The loss of this text deliberately slowed the development of modern finance. What specific principles were debated in its pages? It likely explored early concepts of risk-based interest, the productive use of capital, and the idea that a growing economy could lift all of society. Without these ideas circulating freely, the tools for large-scale investment and economic growth remained primitive for generations. How much sooner might the medieval world have transformed if this treatise had survived to be debated in the open? Its fate is a powerful lesson in how deeply religion and economics are woven together, and how the suppression of a single economic idea can shape the course of history for centuries. The chronicler's hand was steady even as the sounds of battle drew nearer. His manuscript was not a history of kings, but a chronicle of the people, a desperate testament to a rebellion that demanded bread and dignity. Penned by the participants of a peasant revolt, its pages gave voice to the voiceless, recording the names of their fallen leaders, the specific grievances over crushing taxes and stolen common lands, and the brutal tactics used by the knightly class to crush their uprising. This was a dangerous document because it presented a truth that the victorious nobility could never allow to survive. Official histories, written by monastic scribes in the pay of the lords, would record the event as a brief, chaotic disturbance by a lawless mob, rightly put down by their rightful masters. This chronicle told the opposite story, one of organized protest, clear political demands, and a justified resistance against oppression. Its very existence was an act of defiance that reached beyond the battlefield. Can you hear the voices that were silenced when this manuscript was burned? We lost the specific, human stories of the blacksmith who became a strategist, the widow who rallied the village women, the farmer who articulated a vision of justice rooted in ancient rites. Their understanding of feudalism, not as a divine order but as a brutal economic system designed to keep them in servitude, was a political insight so radical it had to be erased. The destruction of this and countless other rebel chronicles was a deliberate act of historical amnesia. It ensured that future generations would lack the inspirational blueprint of a prior uprising, the knowledge that their ancestors had once organized, fought, and nearly won. This loss obscures the full, continuous story of medieval social struggle, making these revolts seem like isolated, hopeless outbursts of rage rather than chapters in a long fight for freedom. What tactics for grassroots organization, what arguments for human rights were lost when that single chronicle was tossed onto the fire? The absence of these first-hand accounts means the story of the Middle Ages remains overwhelmingly a story of the powerful, told by the powerful, while the hopes and courage of the common people fade into a silent, forgotten echo. A single manuscript, illuminated only by the flickering lamp of a midnight scholar, mapped the chaotic landscape of the human subconscious. This forbidden text on dream interpretation was a masterwork of synthesis, weaving together the classical observations of Artemidorus with bold, original medieval insight. It treated dreams not as random noise, but as a complex language of the soul, a window into hidden fears, unspoken desires, and even a conduit for prophetic visions or divine messages. The manuscript meticulously categorized dreams, distinguishing between the mundane anxieties of daily life and what it termed the somnia dio missa, dreams sent from God. It suggested that the mind, in its sleeping state, could process truths that waking consciousness refused to see, and that by understanding the symbols of our own dreams, we could achieve a deeper self-knowledge. This was its first great crime, proposing that divine communication could occur directly with the individual in their sleep, bypassing the priest who was meant to be the sole interpreter of God's will. A peasant who received a powerful dream could now claim a personal revelation, an authority that challenged the entire clerical monopoly on spiritual insight. The text's second transgression was its method. It encouraged a form of introspection and self-analysis that looked remarkably like an early form of psychology. It asked its readers to keep dream journals, to look for patterns in their own mental imagery, and to consider how their hidden emotions shaped the stories their minds told at night. This practice of looking inward for answers was seen as a dangerous vanity, a focus on the self that could lead to spiritual pride or, even worse, to the conclusion that the mind itself was a source of divine truth. The Church, which positioned itself as the necessary gateway to understanding, could not allow such a text to grant individuals that kind of internal authority. Its suppression was a deliberate act to strangle a nascent science of the mind in its cradle. By burning these dream manuscripts, the authorities ensured that the systematic study of the subconscious would be delayed for centuries. How might our understanding of trauma, memory, and human motivation have advanced if this thread of inquiry had not been severed? The loss of this text is not merely a missing chapter in a book, but a missing chapter in our own self-awareness, a forgotten path toward understanding the deepest and most mysterious parts of ourselves. The fragile papyrus crumbled at the edges, its Coptic script weaving around intricate diagrams of celestial realms and a divine mother figure. This was the cryptographic gospel of a Gnostic sect, a secret testament that mapped a cosmos alive with divine sparks trapped in a material world created not by the supreme God, but by a flawed and ignorant demiurge. Its pages offered a radical path to enlightenment, one that relied not on faith or church sacrament, but on a secret knowledge, a gnosis attainable only by a select few. This knowledge was the key to awakening the divine spirit within, recognizing the material body as a prison, and ultimately escaping the cycle of reincarnation to return to the realm of pure, transcendent light. The Gospel's portrayal of the divine feminine was particularly explosive. It venerated a figure like Sophia, or wisdom, as a central creative and redemptive force, a stark contrast to the increasingly patriarchal hierarchy of the early church. Can you grasp how destabilizing this was to a religion consolidating its power around a single, male god and a rigid clerical structure? This manuscript presented a spirituality of direct, personal revelation, where an individual's inner experience and understanding could trump the authority of any bishop. Its very existence was a denial of the Church's claim to be the sole gateway to salvation. The response was a systematic theological purge. As doctrine was formalized, texts that did not conform to the emerging orthodoxy were declared heretical. This Gnostic gospel, with its secret symbols and alternative creation story, was hunted with a particular fervor. Its complex cosmology and empowering message for women made it a primary target. Every copy was sought out and burned, its ashes a testament to the triumph of a single approved narrative over a vibrant tapestry of early Christian thought. The loss is immeasurable. We are left with only a handful of fragments like those found at Nag Hammadi, which offer mere glimpses of this rich theological world. What specific rituals for achieving gnosis were lost? What profound understanding of the divine feminine did its pages hold, and how might that have altered the course of Western spirituality? The silencing of this cryptographic gospel did more than destroy a book. It erased an entire branch of the Christian family tree, ensuring that one version of truth would dominate while others were relegated to the shadows of history. 25 missing books. The cumulative weight of their absence is a ghost that haunts our modern world. Each vanished manuscript was not merely a lost object, but a severed branch on the tree of human knowledge, a silenced voice that left our collective story permanently incomplete. Consider the scientific revolutions that were delayed for generations because an anatomical text was burned, or a set of astronomical charts was left to rot. Think of the spiritual alternatives that were erased, narrowing the spectrum of human belief into a single, approved channel. What democratic movements might have flowered earlier if a banned political treatise on tyranny had been allowed to circulate? What medical breakthroughs could have saved millions if a women's herbal had not been condemned as witchcraft? The destruction of these works did more than just censor ideas. It actively sculpted the timeline of progress, ensuring that certain paths of inquiry were closed off for centuries. Their loss forces us to confront a profound question: what is the true cost of a forbidden book? It is not just the information on its pages, but the future that information would have built. Every time a manuscript was committed to the flames, it was a potential future that was being extinguished, a road not taken that might have led to a more enlightened, more compassionate, or more scientifically advanced world. We are left with the echoes of what might have been, a history defined by its gaps and silences. Yet in uncovering these stories, we do more than simply mourn. We bear witness to the incredible intellectual courage of the individuals who risked everything to write, to copy, and to protect these dangerous truths. They understood that knowledge is the most fragile and most powerful force we possess. Their legacy is a stark reminder that the preservation of diverse voices, especially those that challenge the powerful, is not a luxury. It is a necessity for any society that hopes to grow. As we look back at these 25 voids in our history, we are invited to look forward as well, to consider what forbidden knowledge is being suppressed in our own time, and what future generations might one day mourn as lost because we lack the courage to protect it. Our journey ends here in the silent spaces left by 25 missing books. Each vanished manuscript was more than parchment and ink. It was a testament to the incredible power of an idea and the profound peril faced by those who dared to give it voice. We have wandered through the remnants of libraries reduced to ash, tracing the outlines of heretical gospels that offered different gods, revolutionary scientific charts that mapped a different cosmos, and political treatises that dared to envision a different world. These were not mere disagreements, they were alternative paths to truth, each one challenging the absolute authority of church and crown. The response was not debate but erasure, a deliberate act of forgetting designed to protect a single, controlled narrative. The cost of that suppression is a history full of holes, a legacy of absence that has shaped our understanding of medicine, philosophy, faith, and even our own minds. We are left to wonder about the breakthroughs delayed, the spiritual paths closed, and the freedoms postponed because a book was deemed too dangerous to exist. This is the timeless human drama, the endless struggle between the beacon of knowledge and the battleground it creates. The quest to uncover forbidden truths, to ask the questions we are told not to ask, is what pushes humanity forward. It is a quest that continues in our own time, urging us to be guardians of diverse thought and to pursue understanding in all its forms, no matter how unsettling it may be. We invite you to reflect on these lost worlds. Which of these vanished manuscripts speaks to you most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to join us on our next deep dive into the forgotten corners of history. Thank you for exploring these profound losses with us, and for remembering that what was taken from the past still has the power to illuminate our future.